Back in 1881, this woman was arrested for murder after a fatality occurred from an illegal abortion. But what was the story of the woman who performed these dangerous acts? Let's start from the beginning. Mary Chapman, born in 1840, was the eldest of 4 children to Thomas and Anne Chapman. She spent her childhood with her family on Upper Somerset Street in the Quarry Hill area of Leeds. During this time, the area was cramped with back-to-back housing, with narrow courts that had inadequate drainage and poor ventilation, creating an environment that was both densely populated and unsanitary. Her father Thomas worked as a cow keeper, a role more commonly known as a dairyman. The family resided far from the rural settings typically associated with this line of work. Due to the lack of farmland, it's likely that the cows were kept in small backyards just outside their home, which was not uncommon in industrial cities. By the early 20th century, the unhealthy conditions of Quarry Hill had become so dire that it was deemed uninhabitable and eventually demolished. In 1861, Mary married William George Dover, a compositor. Together they had 3 children, Harry in 1866, Alexander in 1869, and William in 1871. The family lived on Division Street in Sheffield. This was a busy location home to many independent businesses. Sadly, in 1872, Mary's husband William passed away at the young age of 34 after suffering with tuberculosis for 2 years. Now widowed with 3 children to care for, Mary began performing illegal abortions. Women seeking these services often did so out of necessity and desperation, driven by financial strain, the shame of being unmarried, or other difficult personal circumstances. At this time, sexual education and contraception were almost non-existent, leaving women with few choices and no support. Tragically, in 1881, Mary carried out an abortion on 21-year-old Alice Fleet Smith, which had resulted in the woman's death. Alice had been in a relationship with Thomas Turner, a young man from Elsecar, and had become pregnant whilst unmarried. Facing this, she visited Mary Dover in Sheffield, who used instruments to terminate the pregnancy. Sadly, her health began to deteriorate afterwards, and despite her father's efforts to get medical help, Alice passed away. Before her death, she confessed to her father and others that she'd undergone the procedure at Mary Dover's house. The case was heavily reported in the press, under the headline, "Charge of Murder Against a Sheffield Woman." Mary was sentenced to 5 years in prison for performing abortions. While inside, she took on various duties such as sewing and laundry. Despite her circumstances, her time behind bars was uneventful. She avoided trouble, kept to herself, and didn't appear to cause any issues during her incarceration. At the time, her young children were already without a father, who had passed away previously, leaving them in a difficult and uncertain situation. Thankfully, other family members stepped in to care for them while their mother served her sentence. In 1883, she was released from prison on licence. Mary returned to Sheffield, where she married John Turner in 1889. John was a medical botanist, someone who studied and used plants for their healing properties. During this time, interest in botanical medicine was growing in industrial towns like Huddersfield, Manchester and Leeds. The couple settled on Attercliffe Road, where Mary's youngest son also lived with them. They employed a servant, suggesting that John's business was doing well, and the family were living comfortably. John passed away in 1904, leaving Mary widowed again. Just 5 years later, in 1909, Mary herself passed away from diabetes and heart failure.